Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. We're going to get into the Sabaton History for Defense of Moscow. We did this song yesterday, so if you haven't seen that one yet, it should be up, and I'll put the link for it somewhere up there. Also, I am going to try to figure out, finagle, how I'm going to do the surströmming video. I have the materials I need, except the bread. That's a little bit tricky because I don't have this specific bread that's normally used, but I'm going to try to figure all that out and figure out how I'm going to do the recording and use the camera and all that, since I need to be outside for part of it and inside for part of it. And, you know, everybody keeps telling me not to open it in the house, so I'm not going to open it in the house. But if everything goes well and I can figure everything out, that video will be out later this afternoon. That's what I'm going to work on after I get done with this. But this is what we're going to do first. Sabaton History's Defense of Moscow. Let's get into it.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton.
And this is another exciting, thrill-packed episode of Sabaton History.
And this week, it's the defense of Moscow.
Defense of Moscow in 1941. The Axis invasion of the USSR in World War II was codenamed Operation Barbarossa, and the drive on Moscow, Operation Typhoon. Before I talk about this, I will say that it is an enormous subject, and over on my World War II weekly channel, I covered the events of Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, week by week, each and every week in detail, with a whole bunch of special episodes about things like logistics and planning and all. Please check that out for a better understanding. There is a link below. Anyhow, on June 22nd, 1941, Germany and her allies began what was supposed to be Adolf Hitler's magnum opus,
It really is kind of bizarre how, Hitler wasn't the first person to attempt an invasion of Russia. Napoleon had just done it. I mean, it had just happened. And it's weird that you would look at Napoleon's invasion, see how it played out and what happened, and the thought process be, I need more men. Like, that seems like a weird conclusion to come to. Not, I need to figure out something for supplies, for sustained supplies. I need to have a massive buildup for war materials. It was, I need more men, which is very interesting to me because that was the direction Napoleon went, was I just need a ton of men. Give me a ton of men and I can make it happen. So it's just, I don't know, it's kind of bizarre that he basically had the exact same thought process of the guy who failed 100 years before him.
conquest of the Soviet Union. Communism would be destroyed, and Germany would have unlimited space for living, unlimited resources to live off, and the Slavic peoples as a servant class for the master Aryans. Despite the massive buildup of millions of soldiers across the border, the attack took the Soviet Union completely by surprise. Joseph Stalin had been warned repeatedly over the year of planning that went into the offensive that it was going to happen, but he didn't believe it, even thinking by the summer of 1941 that the rumors were a British plot to get him to turn on Germany. See, up until June 22nd, Germany and the USSR were operating under the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which had divided Eastern Europe into zones of conquest between the two powers. Germany was also importing huge amounts of oil every month from the USSR. Still, anyone who read Mein Kampf could see that one day Hitler was going to make an all-out attack on the USSR. It was his ultimate military goal. And June 22nd, 1941 was that day.
Yeah, and I've talked about this on the how Germany could have potentially won World War II video. It's hard to breach ideology from everything else German in this conflict, right? Because ideology just infiltrates into absolutely everything that they do and want to do. But I think Germany, I don't believe, even had to completely take off the board invading the Soviet Union. They just couldn't do it when they did it, is at least, my thought process of like, the second you invade the Soviet Union, that war is basically over. If nothing else, you're going to get a stalemate in the Soviet Union. Now, I've heard historians make the argument, a couple, that the Soviets could not have won the war without Western help. But two things. One, they were getting Western help. And two, the majority of the historians that I've heard talk about this think that the Russians couldn't, or the Soviets couldn't have pushed the Germans back to Berlin without Western help. But they also don't think that Germany could outright take the Soviet Union. And so, best case scenario for the Germans, the second you step foot onto Soviet territory, best case scenario is a stalemate. And I feel like that's just the absolute worst for the overall view of the war, right? Now, the Germans do a lot of stuff in World War II that doesn't make much sense for the war. They waste men and materials doing political things, and, they make some rather baffling decisions. But the idea, it's hubris, I guess, or ideology, or a mixture of both. But yeah, I feel like the second they stepped foot onto Soviet territory, that was it. The absolute best you could hope for was a stalemate. And the Germans couldn't sustain a stalemate. They didn't have the raw materials for it once they invaded the Soviet Union.
That had not been the original date, though. It had been set for May 15th. I am aware that there are many people who believe the invasions of Greece or Yugoslavia or Crete in the spring of 1941 are what altered the timetable, but that is not the case. Before you comment, I should point out that history is what actually happened, not what we would like to have happened. The invasion of Greece was planned simultaneously with Barbarossa already back in late 1940. All the units were allocated already then and had their timetables when they had to head north for Barbarossa. And that invasion went more quickly than planned. The lightning conquest of Yugoslavia allowed that to happen. And the decision to attack Crete was not even made until after the Barbarossa date had been changed.
Yeah, and so again, my argument in the World War II video was that North Africa is the direction you go, right? Speaking of Yugoslavia and Greece and all that, and this is the reason why. If you use all of the men and materials, or not even all, but a large chunk of the men and materials, specifically oil, to go as, with Italy as the liaison to North Africa, you can basically push the British out of the Mediterranean if you're able to take what you want to take in North Africa. Now, the Germans more or less left this up to the Italians, and even once you have the Africa Corps, they're wildly under-resourced and supplied and all that. But if you can push the British out of the Mediterranean, Greece, Yugoslavia, these places are going to capitulate and, either outright fall or join the Axis anyway without an invasion. And so I feel like that is the better direction instead of just outright invading the Soviet Union. But Indy's right. The planning for the Soviet Union was going on at the same time, and it's a long process. I mean, the planning for Operation Barbarossa is a long process. It's not a, it's not a quick decision, which again is how ideology plays a role in everything, because the thought process is that you have to knock out, the communists, even as you have all these other issues going on if you're Germany.
The reason for the date changing was the lateness of the spring floods in 1941. You cannot bring 3.5 million men, 600,000 horses, and hundreds of thousands of tanks, trucks, cars, and motorcycles over the marshy, muddy ground created when the rivers of Eastern Europe break their banks in the flooding. It is physically impossible. And the ground was not hard enough for the invasion to possibly take place until the second week of June at the earliest. Anyhow, the enormous offensive was hugely successful straight off the bat. And over the summer, prisoners were taken by the hundreds of thousands as panzer thrusts surrounded cauldrons of entire Soviet armies. But even during its greatest successes, the operational flaws of Barbarossa could be seen. The Soviet Union has two great advantages in warfare: endless men and endless space. And the colossal distances involved for the attackers to cross and supply wreaked havoc with German logistics already by early July.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about the Soviet Union. All of the, or not all of, but a lot of the other belligerents in this war treat supplies as kind of cheap and dispensable, right? Overmake stuff, send it out, give it to allies, do whatever you have to do to kind of make this a war of overwhelming manufacturing. The Soviets see manpower as one of those resources to be used, at will. Kind of, I know this sounds kind of rough, but like a gun or tank or something like that. You use it until it's worn out, broken, dead, and then you get another one to replace it. So interestingly, the Soviets kind of view manpower as a resource in that type of way.
There were few roads, and German trains were a different gauge from the Soviet ones. So whole new track systems had to be built because the Soviets destroyed their rolling stock, installations, and, well, everything as they fell back or were pushed back. Also, whereas in the Battle of France, the panzers could fill their tanks at roadside gas stations, the Soviets used a different octane gasoline. Basically, everything that was needed to supply the millions of men and their animals and vehicles had to be brought in from further and further away as the summer turned to autumn and the Soviet resistance grew stiffer and stiffer.
That's the Wehrmacht overrun, Russia 1941. They don't belong, we stand our ground, 1,000,000 strong. We are ready for the strike, face the army of the Reich, 1,000,000 strong. This is our land, they don't belong.
But this episode is not about Operation Barbarossa. It is about Operation Typhoon, the German drive on Moscow. The orders for the operation are issued September 6th and call for the destruction of the forces blocking the Moscow road in the limited time which remains available before the onset of the winter weather. Operation Typhoon begins October 2nd. Hitler announces, "Today begins the last great decisive battle of the year. At last, we have created the prerequisites for the final tremendous blow, which, before the onset of winter, will lead to the destruction of the enemy."
Again, Napoleon, like the idea that if you take Moscow, that's it. The Soviet Union collapses once you take Moscow. I don't even understand like the thread in logic to get to that conclusion. What, like, you've taken tons of cities and towns. Why would Moscow be any different? I don't know. I just don't. Like, sure, it's important, but it's not everything collapses if it's taken important. Like, that seems so crazy to me.
Actually, the night before, he issues a proclamation to be read to the troops that in barely 3 months, you have taken over 2 million prisoners. You have destroyed or captured 17,500 tanks and over 21,000 guns. You have downed or destroyed on the ground 14,200 planes. The world has never seen anything like this. Which may well be true, but, they still haven't won. Dr. Heinrich Happe, who's been with the spearheads of Barbarossa since June 22nd, writes that in spite of such staggering losses, east of the Meja, the Russians prepared a strong system of trenches, bunkers, tank traps, and barbed wire entanglements, brought up supplies, and gathered their strength to stand against us once more. And just a side note, there is no guarantee that even taking Moscow will mean the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yet the offensive immediately breaks through the Soviet positions. Panzer Group 4 advances 15 kilometers that day. Panzer Group 3, 20. On the 3rd in Berlin, Adolf Hitler gives his first national address since Barbarossa began. On the morning of June 22nd, the greatest struggle in the history of the world began. Today, I can state that everything has gone to plan. I may say today that this opponent has already broken down and will never rise again. By that evening.
Wow. Nostradamus there. I don't... Again, the Germans do a bunch of dumb stuff in World War II, but I don't understand the leap in logic to take Moscow. And it's not just Moscow. There's other cities in the Soviet Union that they try to take that don't make a ton of sense to me either. You need raw materials. There is the Russians have moved their factories way east, right? You need raw materials. You have no way to get to the Russian factories in the amount of time you would need to stop some sort of counteroffensive or something. And so the name of the game has got to be do what you can to stop Soviet resupply near you. But other than that, make your way towards raw materials, because that's the only way that this war sustains for the Germans, is if they get raw materials. But, I mean, I don't know. That's a long-ass way to Moscow to, I don't really know for what.
The panzers have advanced a full 50 kilometers. Panzer Army Commander Heinz Guderian reports snow on October 6, but as John Keegan points out, it's hard to know which would be better for the attackers, a long autumn or an early winter. A long autumn will mean trying to advance through roads turned into swamps by the rains, which might not be possible, but an early Russian winter, will freeze the roads solid enough but will bring blizzards and frostbite. As planned, while the Germans advance, Russian peasants set fire to the already harvested crops, blow up village buildings, and drive the animals away. They will leave behind literally nothing but blackened earth for the Germans. And the Red Army is really starting to fight back. And yet, the armored rings of Army Group Center's 3 panzer groups are slowly closing. But already after the first few days, Guderian's and Hermann Hoth's panzers cannot advance temporarily for lack of fuel. The Luftwaffe does not have any sort of aerial supremacy, and the Red Air Force is making life difficult for the Germans on the ground. However, Soviet Army Chief of Staff Boris Shaposhnikov gets a report that a German column, 20 kilometers long, is advancing unopposed on Yukhnov, around a third of the way to Moscow. The plain fact is, German units are operating behind Soviet lines with nothing between them and Moscow. Joseph Stalin says to mobilize everything and hold the Germans for a week till they can bring in reserves. A new defense line should be built west of Moscow, anchored on Mozhaisk. The Western, Bryansk, and reserve fronts are now authorized to withdraw, but it seems to be too late. By the 7th, disaster is unfolding. Georgy Zhukov has arrived from Leningrad to take over Moscow's defense, but he sees the scale of the disaster. Both the Western and reserve fronts are in a huge pocket, centered on Vyazma, and the road to Moscow is, in fact, open. Exciting, isn't it?
And Stalin's orders, defend the motherland, Moscow shall not fall. Standing for command, the blood for the whole land. Hear the mother's call, right to the storm. Moscow will never give in, there is no surrender. Force them into retreat and into defeat.
Yeah, to be honest though, this had already been done once. When the Germans first invaded and threatened all of, not all of, but like 90% of Russia's war manufacturing right whenever the war started, the same thing was done. Stalin sent civilians, military personnel, anybody he could find to hold those cities. And the factories at first started going into overdrive. It was only once it was very obvious that the cities were going to fall that they got the factories, they took them apart and got them the hell out of Dodge. But the same thing had been done there. It just wasn't successful. The big deal for this one is that it is successful, obviously.
The weather changes at the end of the first week. Colder, and with rain and snow. The Rasputitsa, the autumn mud, is beginning. Vasily Grossman writes, there's rain, snow, hailstones, a liquid bottomless swamp, black pastry mixed by thousands and thousands of boots, wheels, caterpillars, and everybody is happy once again. The Germans must get stuck in our hellish autumn. But Army Group Center's war diary that day proclaims, all corps have the order, forwards, forwards, forwards. By mid-month, there is panic in Moscow, and people evacuate east. But Zhukov has mobilized 250,000 Muscovites, most of them women, to build the city's defenses. After 3 weeks of Typhoon, stubborn defense and ever more mud, snow, and ice have prevented the Germans from reaching the city. But all the while, the German papers have proclaimed impending victory. American journalist Howard Smith in Berlin says that now really comes the breaking point for many German people in terms of trusting their government's accurate reporting of the war. Joseph Goebbels' diary says, our victory news is no longer accepted with the required attention and necessary importance. And even as Vyazma falls, it drives home the question to the average German soldier, just how big is the Red Army? Because they're still not beaten. Vyazma is just the first hurdle. And when Stalin gets the intelligence that the Japanese will definitely not attack the Soviets in the east until at least the spring of 1942, he orders half of the divisional strength of the Far East to head west to hold Moscow. That's more than 8 divisions with 1,000 tanks and 1,000 planes.
That is the really interesting kind of wild card of this whole thing, right? What if the Japanese, what if the Japanese and Germans were really allies and the Japanese were willing to essentially help this invasion? Like, could the two of them have taken down the giant, right? That's the Japan is the interesting piece of this, because yes, once it is made clear, and Japan is making it as clear as they possibly can, that they don't want any part of attacking the Soviet Union. And once that's made clear to the Soviet Union, then yeah, they move soldiers east to west as quickly as they can.
500,000 people are now working on the city's defenses, but the Germans are just 100 kilometers away. However, the Blitz tactics, which had so utterly shattered the Soviet front in early October when conditions were dry and the panzer forces more tightly concentrated, were now impossible. On October 30th, Operation Typhoon comes to a halt until the winter weather can freeze the ground enough for some mobility to return for the Germans. On November 7th, Joseph Stalin gives his famous speech of defiance in Red Square and the October Revolution Parade, promising the destruction of the German invaders. Their drive is renewed November 15th in minus 20-degree weather. Lubricating oil freezes, rifle bolts break, sentries freeze to death, but the German advance continues. Advance units cross the Volga-Moscow Canal. General Konstantin Rokossovsky gets the order. Kryukovo is the final point of withdrawal. There can be no further falling back. There is nowhere to fall back to. The canal is now the last big obstacle before Moscow is surrounded from the north. On the morning of November 28th, German panzers are not more than 35 kilometers from the Kremlin. Erich Hepner's 4th Panzers take Krasnaya Polyana November 30th and are now in artillery range of Moscow. In the morning of December 1st, Gunther von Kluge's 4th Army launches a furious attempt to take the shortest route to Moscow, the Minsk-Moscow Highway. By noon, the Soviets have been pushed back several kilometers, and the Germans are 7 kilometers from the highway. Should they reach the highway and split the Soviet 5th and 33rd Armies, well, Zhukov cannot allow that to happen, so he throws everything he has left into the breach. On December 2nd, a German combat engineer patrol reaches Khimki, 18 kilometers from the city center, on a scouting mission. This is the closest the Germans get to Moscow. In a deep and terrible freeze, with German soldiers screaming in the snow that they could not go on, the last German bid for Moscow had failed. On December 4th, it is minus 37 degrees. Blizzards have begun, and the Wehrmacht has been stretched to its breaking point and has failed. And at 3 a.m., December 5th, the Great Red Army counteroffensive begins. But that, my friends, is a story for another day.
Face the bullets of their guns, Russia's daughters and her sons, all the brave who stand against the typhoon wave.
But what is the tale for today? I'll ask you a question in a second, but this is the first episode with you that we've done in this new set.
Yes.
So what do you think?
So far, so good. It's
Yeah.
the first shot. There's a bit of sand on the floor. So it's really super beautiful. Even the historical part that we saw was the first part of 4.
Yeah, this is all new. And this is what's going to be the set for the next 11, 12 episodes, whenever
like
they
that.
get to come out. Now, I'm holding a grenade.
Why?
Well, I can't let go of it, because then we'll have to build another set. Okay, but enough about me. The tale for today, all right? Tale for today, the defense of Moscow.
Yes.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit about this.
This is a bit of an unusual song, actually, because it's a cover. We've done covers before.
Yeah.
But this is a cover of a Russian guy called Radio Tapok. And in the...
Yeah, somebody had put this in the comments for the song, that he covers their songs, and we saw that in another video about him covering their songs, but that this one was them covering one of his songs, which is interesting to me.
In the past, he's done Sabaton covers. I would say, well, some of the most famous ones would be Attack of the Dead Men,
Right.
Night Witches, but check him out seriously. He's done a lot more stuff. And he made this song about the defense of Moscow
Right.
in the style of Sabaton. So
Okay.
it's his song that he did in the style of Sabaton. And we thought, well, he's done a bunch of covers on us. Why don't we
too.
make a cover of his stuff, you know?
But, you know, in terms of covers, every band at some point does a cover of something, even if it's just messing around in their rehearsal room and stuff.
Yeah.
What about you guys?
Oh, well, there's been quite a few. We've done, lately, we did some, well, I think one of the most famous ones or popular ones was In the Army Now, which is
Sure.
what I think most people would think is a status quo song, but it's actually a Bolland and Bolland song. So we
Yeah.
made a cover of the cover, I guess.
Now, when you guys first got together, your first rehearsals and stuff, were you already writing songs then, or was it mostly just covers until you beefed up your own repertoire?
A bit of everything, actually. When we started out and, sort of, had people coming and going and became Sabaton, I mean, it was basically the same bunch of friends listening to Judas Priest and Halloween and Iron Maiden and, drinking beer. There was a bunch of covers from
Yeah?
all kinds of bands. But we really early, we started making our own music as well.
And you plan to be like 100% like this. Our show is 100% Sabaton music, was the
I
idea.
mean, at that point, we didn't have a career plan or anything. We were just a bunch of guys drinking beer and having fun, you know?
Well, what about other people's covers that might be either unexpected or things that you think are a cover of something and they're not? They're a cover of something different.
Well, for me, I mean, I hadn't known when I heard Johnny Cash play Hurt when that was released. I think
Yeah.
it was Rick Rubin who
Yeah,
did the
when they did the
arrangements for
American
him.
songs, yeah.
And I didn't know that was a cover until a year later, that it was a Nine Inch Nails song.
Oh, I
Yeah,
remember the
that-
Nine Inch Nails version.
Yeah, Nine Inch Nails did the song Hurt. I don't know if any of you have heard that one, but Nine Inch Nails did the original song Hurt, and then Johnny Cash did it, I don't know how many years later, but Johnny Cash is it's really weird because the Nine Inch Nails one is done from the perspective of like a younger guy. And so the song's like really kind of dark and deeper, but the Nine Inch Nails one is done from the perspective of a younger guy who I guess his like life is sort of slipping away. But the Johnny Cash one is done from the perspective, even though it's the exact same song, done from the perspective of an older guy who is looking back on his life that went a different direction. It's a super interesting like juxtaposition to each other. But yeah, I didn't know initially when I heard the Johnny Cash version that it was Nine Inch Nails.
I like Nine Inch Nails back in the day.
Yeah.
Back in the day. You see, it's not just Gina G and Bailando for me. I have a fairly broad palette. Hey, you want to hear a good story
Oh,
about a cover?
Bailando, you should ask Tommy about that song.
Can we get a picture of Tommy? Can we get a picture of the Bailando girls too? Can we swap faces? Right now. Okay, wait, so what is the story with Tommy and Bailando?
No, you'll have to ask him, you know. It's
Okay. Damn it.
He swore me to secrecy.
Okay. Ooh. No, but here's a thing of a cover of a cover. You know, the Kingsmen do the famous version of Louie Louie that everybody know. You know, hello, hello, and everybody knows that and stuff. And a lot of people know that song is a cover. But the original version was a guy named Richard Berry in 1955. And the original version, if you find it, which we don't have the rights to, but it's super cool. It's my favorite version. It's really smooth, like 50s R&B, right? But the Kingsmen had not heard that version. They didn't cover that version. There was a guy in the Pacific Northwest in like Washington State and Oregon, where the Kingsmen are from, called Rockin' Robin Roberts, who in the late 50s did a cover of that. And it has, because the original version doesn't go, hello, hello, that's not how the original version goes. Rockin' Robin Roberts sort of does some of that. But his cover sounds a bit like the original. But the Kingsmen cover sounds nothing like the original because they never heard the original. So they did a cover of the cover, thinking that they were doing a cover.
Man, I love artist names back in the 50s.
Rockin' Robin Roberts.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And Richard Berry was apparently no relation to Chuck Berry. But he was a California-based R&B dude in the mid-50s. The things you learn here on Sabaton History.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, I think that is actually it for today's exciting tale of glory and covers. Glory. I'm still holding this, you know.
I think they want to see the end.
Okay, well, that is it for Joachim and myself for today's exciting episode of the Sabaton History Channel.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and insert cool explosion effects and stuff now.
Oh. Okay, so that was the Sabaton History for Defense of Moscow. I am going to try to get all the surstroming stuff figured out, but as always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the link to the Discord down below. Hopefully I get that video out later today, and I'll see you all next time.